Max stood on his balcony, holding the papers that could destroy everything. His dream home torn down by a neighborhood association over its design. Furious, he prepared for the fight of his life against the HOA president. But in the courtroom, what happened next shocked everyone. Max didn't just win, he tore the system apart. What happened then? It will change everything. But let's start from the beginning. It was meant to be the perfect summer project. Max Williams, a 38-year-old software engineer, had poured his heart and soul into building the custom deck he had always dreamed of. For months, he meticulously selected the finest materials, imported the wood, and designed a space that would transform his backyard into a sanctuary for his family. Every detail was crafted with precision, from the sleek design to the flawless finish. To Max, it was more than just a home improvement. It was an investment in quality family time, memories, and the very essence of home. But when he sent the final pictures to the Homeowners Association, HOA, his excitement quickly shifted to anxiety. Just days later, he received a letter that crushed him. The deck didn't meet HOA codes. The wood finish wasn't approved, and it exceeded the size limit by a few feet. Max's dream project was suddenly deemed illegal. Worse still, the HOA demanded it be torn down, or else face legal action. Max was left stunned. He had followed every guideline he could find, but this verdict felt personal. His neighbors, many of whom had made far more significant modifications to their homes, had never faced such scrutiny. Their changes, more visible, more drastic, went unnoticed, while his small, tasteful addition was singled out. The decision wasn't just unfair. It felt like an attack on everything he had worked for. As Max stood on his deck, staring at the letter in his hand, anger and disbelief flooded through him. This wasn't just about a deck anymore. It was about standing up for what was right, even if it meant fighting a system that seemed designed to crush anyone who didn't follow the unwritten rules. Max's frustration quickly escalated into full-blown fury. It wasn't just about his deck anymore. It was about standing up to the HOA's unfair treatment. He wasn't going to let them push him around. After a series of tense meetings and endless phone calls with his lawyer, Max made a decision. He wouldn't tear the deck down. He would fight back, no matter the cost. The HOA's demands weren't just unreasonable. They were personal, arbitrary, and a blatant overreach of authority. Max realized that he wasn't the only one affected. He began talking to his neighbors, and the more he listened, the more it became clear that this wasn't an isolated incident. Other homeowners had faced similar issues, minor infractions cited for what seemed like no other reason than to keep people in line. Issues that were more about control than genuine violations of the rules. As word spread, something began to shift in the neighborhood. The once passive, compliant community started to rally behind Max. What had been a quiet, uninvolved group of neighbors was now a unified force, standing against what they saw as the HOA's bullying tactics. They felt emboldened by Max's decision to stand firm. It wasn't just about one deck anymore. It was about pushing back against the HOA's unchecked power. Max felt a renewed sense of purpose as the support grew. He wasn't fighting alone anymore, and he wasn't just fighting for his deck. He was fighting for the right to make his own choices, for the right to challenge a system that had long gone unchecked. If the HOA wanted a battle, they were going to get one. Max was ready, and the stakes had never felt higher. The court date had finally arrived. Max, dressed in a sharp suit, entered the courtroom, his lawyer by his side, ready for the battle ahead. Across from them, the HOA's attorney stood, prepared to argue that Max's deck was a violation of the community's rules. At his side was Gerald Carter, the HOA president, a pompous man who wore his tailored suit like a badge of superiority. He looked smug, confident that the system was on his side. He had no idea what was coming. The HOA's case was weak. Carter argued that Max's deck was a blight on the neighborhood, a stain on the community's otherwise perfect image. He insisted it violated the community standards they had worked so hard to uphold, but Max wasn't going to let that slide. Max's lawyer methodically dismantled the HOA's case. They presented evidence that the HOA had overlooked other, more significant violations by other homeowners, offering proof of selective enforcement. There were no clear guidelines in the community's rules about the proper finishes for decks or the size limits for outdoor structures. The HOA had failed to provide any documentation or formal approval process for these regulations. The judge listened carefully, absorbing the arguments. Max's heart pounded, but for the first time in the whole ordeal he felt a glimmer of hope. The odds weren't as stacked against him as he had feared. As the days of deliberation stretched on, something changed inside Max. His anger had evolved into a burning sense of purpose. He wasn't just fighting for his deck anymore. It was no longer about personal pride or defiance. Max was fighting for fairness, for transparency in a system that had always been opaque and corrupt, for the accountability that the HOA had long avoided. This battle was bigger than him. And now, with every piece of evidence laid out, Max realized the fight he had started might just be the first step toward something much more significant. The day of the final ruling arrived, and the courtroom was thick with tension. Max sat at the edge of his seat, his lawyer beside him, the courtroom eerily quiet as the judge prepared to announce the decision. Gerald Carter, the HOA president, sat across from him, his face a mask of arrogance, no doubt confident the system would favor him once more. But the judge's words shattered that arrogance in an instant. The ruling was clear. The HOA had overstepped its bounds. It had acted without just cause, forcing actions on Max without proper grounds or legal backing. The deck, the symbol of Max's fight, would remain. The HOA was ordered not only to pay for Max's legal fees, but also to pay a fine for wrongful persecution. Max's chest tightened as the judge's words settled in. He had won. The victory was more than just a legal triumph. It was a personal one. The weight that had hung over him for so long lifted, but the sensation wasn't simply relief. It was vindication. The sweet taste of proving that standing up for what's right could lead to real change. Max had done it. He had fought back against an unjust system and emerged victorious. The courtroom erupted in applause, the sound of it reverberating in Max's ears like a symphony of justice. He could feel the pride swelling inside him as his neighbors cheered. This wasn't just his win. This was a win for the entire community. No longer would they live in fear of Gerald Carter's authoritarian grip. No longer would they be silent when injustice reigned in their own backyard. As the crowd's cheers filled the room, Max's gaze shifted to Carter, who, for the first time in a long while, looked smaller, diminished. It was a subtle shift, but unmistakable. The trial had exposed his arrogance, his greed, and now he would have to answer for it. Just days after the trial, Carter was quietly ousted from his position, his reign over the community crumbling under its own weight. Max's victory wasn't just a legal one. It was a victory for every homeowner who had ever felt powerless against a system that seemed impossible to challenge. It was proof that the status quo could be upended. And in that moment, Max knew that his fight had sparked something much larger, a wave of change that could never be silenced.